Good afternoon and welcome back to February 2022's Real Estate Live UK programme. And thanks for joining us for the final session of this week's programme. Programmes are virtual events run 3 times a year and are brought to you by White Label, our partners and sponsors. Before we get underway, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the organisations that have contributed to the brilliant panels we've had taking place this week. Over the past 3 days, places across the UK have been showcasing investment opportunities, and industry-leading experts have explored ideas and topical issues relating to property, including panels on sustainable stadiums, life sciences, social value, and this session, levelling up. Several of our panels and presentations have also linked to our key themes for the February programme: sustainability and biodiversity, inclusive communities, and future infrastructure. You can find out more about Real Estate Live UK by visiting our website, www.realestatelive.co.uk. Right now, we're asking, what role does the real estate sector play in levelling up the UK? Just before we start, though, I would just like to remind you, the audience, please feel free to ask your questions using Zoom's Q&A function. And now, I'm pleased to hand over to our chair for this session, Melanie Leach, Chief Executive of the British Property Federation. Over to you, Melanie.
Thank you very much, Callum, and good afternoon, everybody. As Callum said, we're going to talk about all things levelling up, and I'm going to be very interested to hear from my panellists whether they now know, with the publication of the government's white paper, what levelling up is, and more importantly, what it's going to mean for them and how the real estate sector can be part of the journey and the commitment to levelling up. I've got a stellar panel, so I'm not going to talk. I'm going to let them talk, and I'll introduce them one by one. But before I do, can I just reiterate Callum's challenge to you to get involved, ask your questions, don't miss the opportunity to hear from this panel. And if there's something you want to know about levelling up, then let's see if the panel can help us with that. Let's see if they know, they understand and can help us. Or if not, maybe we find we're all sort of still slightly lacking. And that's an opportunity. I mean, certainly from the British Property Federation point of view, we see levelling up as a huge opportunity for the real estate sector. You cannot hope to improve the lives of people across the country, to improve the fabric of our towns and city centres without massive investment into real estate, without giving the platform that we all live our lives by, whether it's at work, at home, or when we're relaxing. So I think there is a huge opportunity for real estate. And if government hasn't yet filled in all the details, spoiler alert, I think our panel may suggest that's probably true in some cases, then there's an opportunity for us, isn't there? Because we're the people that make things happen. Civil servants in Whitehall don't make things happen. Businesses across the country, real estate investors, developers, managers on the ground make things happen. So I'm very excited to hear what our panel think of the real opportunities and potentials of the levelling up agenda. And I'm going to turn, if I may, first to Stephen Cowperthwaite, Principal and Managing Director at Avison Young, and also Chair of the Liverpool Place Partnership. So Stephen, what do you think in terms of Liverpool? You know, what do you see as the implications of the government's agenda, the white paper, and the levelling up agenda for Liverpool?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think in the white paper that obviously runs to over 300 pages, there's not an awful lot that's new in there, and in actual fact, about a third of the document is kind of historical analysis as well to kind of reinforce that message. I took the liberty of searching Liverpool in the documents earlier on today, and in the 305 pages it appears 38 times. So for a core city, it's not a huge amount in reality. And also, you know, there's a lot of talk about towns rather than cities in the Levelling Up white paper, and similarly, you know, both Manchester and West Mids are referenced as trailblazers for deepened devolution, and Liverpool isn't. So it doesn't bode well, you might say, as a starter for 10. But I guess, you know, Avison Young, we produce a UK Cities Recovery Index and have been doing that since the start of the pandemic back in March 2020. And what that has shown is Liverpool's resilience in recovery. And to a large degree, that's helped by the strength of the retail and leisure offer within the city centre, which has helped to attract people back into Liverpool, and certainly that open streetscape of Liverpool One helps in that context. But really, the question is, how can we level it up, benefit over and above that retail and leisure economy? What else is there for Liverpool? but not just for the city. It has to be about the towns in the wider Liverpool City region as well. And I think that's really important. So kind of continuing that history theme, if you like, you go back to the 1980s and Lord Heseltine when he kick-started Liverpool's Renaissance, which focused at that time upon the waterfront, which still remains hugely important to Liverpool as an asset, as a cultural asset, and just as part of the DNA of the city as well. And certainly we can come on to more about how Liverpool, Wirral Waters and King's Dock and other opportunities along the waterfront will help to continue Liverpool to grow, and not just in a city context. But at that time, he asked for solutions rather than problems, because I think historically people had just come up with problems. And that's where, wearing my Chair of Liverpool Place partnership hat becomes quite interesting, because we're a collective of private sector businesses, but we work very collaboratively and closely with our public sector colleagues to help deliver in with investments into the city region. So I think, Liverpool may not be referenced as a devolution trail or a levelling up trailblazer, if you like, within the white paper, but it absolutely must be. And as per Lord Heseltine, we need more local solutions, and we need to give the leaders within the city region the opportunity to come up with those solutions and not be dictated how that happens. I think key for me in the levelling up agenda is how funding is allocated, and that it has to be not just short-term funding, but funding that allows for longer-term investment in places that help benefit the communities within which they're located. Move away from the beauty parade politics, if you like, so that we can get true investment into places that are worthy of them. But also addresses resource, because I think that's a massive challenge, both in terms of capacity and capability for a lot of the local authorities within the region. And plainly that from a city region perspective, I think that's combined authority can play a big role in that context. So what does it mean for Liverpool? The ingredients are very much there. Melanie, you'll have heard lots around Liverpool's growing knowledge economy. We've been strong in some ways in terms of the pandemic because of the great work that's been done in research. The Pandemic Institute launched in Liverpool as well. The Knowledge Quarter is growing, but also in collaboration with Manchester, not in competition with. And I think that becomes really interesting as you look on a broader scale. There's the free ports, there's digital infrastructure, there's renewable energy, both, off the coast, wind, etc., but also the potential from a tidal perspective with Liverpool to create energy. And obviously there's the age-old transport infrastructure, but levelling up has to be so much more than improved transport links, but that's an essential part of it. But I think the final point I would make is that levelling up is not a success if places like Bootle, which is 10 minutes from Liverpool city centre, yet one of the most deprived areas in the country, isn't successful in levelling up funding. And that has been the case to date. The Bootle has been unsuccessful. And I mention this in the context that we're advising the council, who acquired the Strand shopping centre about 4 years ago, and are looking to transform that asset. That is not about, trouble in retail is well documented, and it's about what you can bring in from educational, health and well-being, digital, transport, etc. And the idea of having to pitch for separate pots of money to make that happen just doesn't feel right to me. So we need a much more mature understanding of how funding should work at government level. And I think that ties into one of the mission statements in the white paper around that sense of community, local pride and belonging. And that has to be the role of real estate, that we provide places that people can really be proud of and where communities want to engage with them. So we were lucky in Liverpool to host the Convention of the North a couple of weeks ago, where Mr. Gove came and gave an address to Liverpool, and he's promised to return before the end of April as well. So I would invite him personally to come along to Bootle to see, the challenges in action there, but also that there are solutions, but the solutions do not lie in filling out forms.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Stephen. I'm going to come next to Charlie Lawrence. Charlie, you're property manager, major projects, Highlands and Islands Enterprise. I'm going to take a wild guess and think that there are fewer than 38 mentions of the Highlands and Islands in the white paper. So, Stephen, you're not doing too badly in Liverpool after all. Charlie, I know you've got some slides, so we'll just wait a sec to get those up on screen, if we may. And over to you.
Thanks, Melanie. And Stephen, the first thing I'm going to do is Google to see how many times Highlands and Islands are mentioned, and my suspicion would be probably none. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So, levelling up, how does that impact on the Highlands and Islands? Well, we probably have a very different perspective because of our geography and where we sit. So, Amy, if we could go to the second slide, please. So in terms of background for the listeners, Highlands and Islands Enterprise are the economic and community development agency for the north and west of Scotland. We cover a diverse, mainly rural region stretching from the Shetland Isles in the north down to Argyll in the south. Our core function is an economic development agency, and we were set up in the 60s. So in many respects, we've been dealing with levelling up since then, just through our day-to-day operations. The region, as you would expect, had real challenges with depopulation, lots of young people leaving, lack of job opportunities, lack of connectivity and low wages. So they're all issues that we've focused on and developed solutions to try and address over the past 50 years or so. If we could move to the next slide, please, Amy. So the question is, what are we going to do to ensure we continue to level up? So we need to use our previous experience to good effect. And I probably should point out that in Scotland, through devolution and through the structure of HIE, the majority of the funding we got was European funding. So as you drive around the Highlands and Islands, you will regularly see road signs with European funding has delivered this infrastructure. And obviously that's gone. So at a simple level, levelling up to us means ideally replicating that funding source at a UK level. So we've been liaising closely with Scottish and UK governments to try and understand how levelling up funding will work. From our perspective, there's still not clarity on the detail of that, although the information that's come out is very useful. But our approach is to continue with our economic development approach. The two key things I would stress that continue, and Stephen touched on these, is we find that successful projects need to be locally based, and they need two key elements. They need partnership working, so across public, private sector, and also community engagement. I think in the past there's been too many projects where it's been imposed on communities rather than getting community buy-in and building it up the way. Both are very important. One of the challenges in levelling up is that funding will go direct to local authorities. And in our case, we cover 6 local authorities, so a regional approach would be better. And if we can jump to the next slide, please. So just quickly, 2 examples of large projects to give you a feel for our area. So that's Inverness Campus, which is 215 acres, 135 million of investment, a partnership between the local authorities, NHS, us, and the private sector. It's a good example of the type of thing that levelling up should help to deliver across the UK. The next slide, please. Another one to touch on is the Orkney Research and Innovation Campus in Stromness in Orkney, which is hugely exciting development, £7 million, focused on renewable energy, specifically wave and tidal energy generation, creating high-value jobs there. Again, a partnership, local authority, us, and the private sector, plus universities. And if we can go to the final slide, please. Just to try and draw that together, from our perspective, we really need the detail and clarity on levelling up, how funding will be allocated and how it will impact on our region. One of the really exciting things for us recently that some of you will have picked up on is the Scotland leasing announcements, which are shown on the plan. So there's huge renewable energy opportunities, and one of the criteria of those is that the successful bidders deliver local opportunities. So we'll be working quite hard to ensure that creates jobs in the Highlands and Islands. We've also had lots of experience with growth deal projects. So I think growth deal projects, as well as levelling up funding, can be used. Clearly, real estate's very important in all of these projects. And to try and broaden it out, I think there are lots of related issues where real estate should be feeding into the levelling up agenda. So housing's very important. The challenges around build cost inflation. I think taxation, how we apply VAT, could be used more cleverly to deliver investment business rates as well. And we all have challenges with net zero. So I think real estate needs to be a lead in delivering levelling up. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlie. Next, I'm going to come to Jackie Sadek. Jackie, your hat today, I think, is as chair of in Ipswich Vision, but you've been around these kinds of issues, both in the policy debate and on the ground, delivering projects that encapsulate what I think most of us would sort of think of as levelling up for some time. I'm not going to say a long time, because that makes it sound like two old bags talking to each other, doesn't it? But for some time. How's that? For some time. And I think probably Charlie said a couple of things that I think would particularly resonate with you. And I'm going to ask about one in particular, which is that sort of collaboration piece, joining up national government, local government, the real estate sector, the private sector, and local communities critically. So how important is that going to be to delivering some, if not all of this? Mm-hmm.
Well, all I will say, Melanie, to that very kind invitation is if the cap fits, wear it. And I'm not frightened of being two old girls who've been around the track a few times. I'd be proud to be going around the track with you any day. And just to say also, I am here with an Ipswich Vision hat on, but only really because the invitation came in via Ipswich, actually. I'm kind of only going to talk about levelling up, really, and not really mention Ipswich, which you won't be surprised to hear gets absolutely no mention at all in the levelling up white paper. Actually, I think what we ought to do is go for a cities mention bingo, because I think Liverpool will have done better than Leeds. And I understand that there's more mentions of medieval Italy than there is of Leeds in the document, which I think is fantastic. And it has got quite a whimsical, some of the levelling up document has got quite a whimsical feel. But anyway, I digress. I'm going to talk about three things very, very briefly. The first is a general remark about the policy. The second is just a touch on devolution and localism, although Stephen's nicked my clothes slightly. And the third is to talk about the funding and who's going to deliver this thing. And all of that rooted and predicated through exactly what you said at the beginning, Melanie, which is this partnership between the property sector and government. And whether it's government nationally or government locally, there's got to be a very strong partnership forged, which is why, actually, funny enough, getting back on the horse at MIPIM this year and other events where we start to come together as teams, I think is really, really important. But just really to make a few kind of remarks about the policy. No bugger in the world knows what levelling up means, right? I mean, let's just get that out in the open. It's a complete Alice in Wonderland term. It means precisely what I wanted to mean, no more, no less, right? But none the worse for that, if the truth be known, because actually, Melanie, what you say is right. There is an opportunity in there, because it's down to us, the guys out on the ground, who can populate and deliver this policy in the best way possible. And instinctively, we all feel that it's right. We've had for over 5 decades now, London now in the southeast, I suppose, as a conurbation, growing like a behemoth, and now strutting its stuff on a global stage. And that's great. And, if London's a problem, it's a problem that every country in the world would love to have. So let's not knock London, right? But it's been a global city for an awful long time, with, frankly, a third world situation in a lot of regards hanging off the end of it. Obviously, some notable exceptions, some notable pockets of wealth. But, London's competitors frankly, have not been Birmingham or Manchester for the last 50 years. They've been, Tokyo and Paris and New York. And we've got to kind of face the reality of what we're dealing with. So the policy, I think, is right. And the idea that you have a number of cities all thrusting forward in the same way as, say, a German model, where you've got a number of different economic centres, perhaps each with a different narrative, I don't know, but, a number of different places thrusting forward, I think makes the policy, instinctively, we feel it's right. And I think the real estate sector, and I'm really glad what you said about, the BPF's position, the real estate sector has warmed and is really interested in all of this and would really like to get stuck in. And so I think there is a massive opportunity for that, for us in all of that. The second point to make is, I wanted to go on to devolution and localism. You do not grow economies from the top down. You grow economies from the bottom up. And that's why it's so important to go back to, and Stephen alluded to this, or mentioned this, not even alluded, to Lord Heseltine's work on devolution and Lord Heseltine's work generally in trying to push power out of Whitehall, power and resources out of Whitehall and into the city regions, quite rightly. And God knows we owe him an awful lot in terms of that thinking. And this white paper builds an awful lot on the work that Michael Heseltine and Greg Clark did. None the worse for that. I think that work is well worth revisiting. We never landed it properly. I'm kind of hoping that this time around we're going to get another crack at landing this policy. And we have to acknowledge that we do have the most able person in the cabinet leading it. I mean, whatever you think about Michael Gove's policies, on his politics, he has got a command of Whitehall and how to get Whitehall to work towards a shared mission. He can do that. So this is a very good chance for us to see through on that agenda, and quite rightly as well. And the last thing I wanted to touch on is funding and who's going to deliver all of this. And already, again, and Stephen and Charlie have both kind of talked about the wearying beauty parade of funding rounds, and the exhausting rounds of bidding, and we've all been there, where local authorities have to work with their private sector partners to do bidding into, central government pots and grading and marking, and it's all knackering, and, you end up, and it's, and all the energy goes into the bids rather than to the delivery of the project. And that is exhausting, and we must find a much more long-term way of doing this. The government money is sort of interesting because it kind of sets the tone, but the people that are going to be delivering this agenda are the private sector. And the proof of the pudding will be in how much the government is prepared to work with the property sectors. No pressure on you, Melanie, or anything, but how much is the government prepared to work with the property sector to create the conditions whereby we can come in and invest, because we want to do it. And there's a wall of money out there who wants to get in, and there's now an ESG agenda that we've got to perform to, so everybody wants to do. And to be honest with you, Stephen, if this isn't Bootle's moment, and it's really interesting you should say about Bootle, because I was having lunch with a very senior person in the industry last week. I won't mention his name, but you'd all know who he was, who said, but it's not going to help Bootle. I think we have to try and push Bootle forward now, because if the funders are serious about only funding ESG, compliant stuff, if the government's serious about levelling up, then this is, in my view, this is Bootle's moment, and no pressure on you, Stephen, to push Bootle forward. So in conclusion, I just would say, document's far too long. 322 pages is quite absurd. It's like a J.K. Rowling novel, and we could have done. And there's a good summary, but we could have done with a much shorter document, a much less repetitive document. It's too long on analysis. It's not long enough on solutions or any ideas as to how to deliver it. It's a bit on the fanciful side, and you can feel the kind of the sense of the beauty idea kind of running through it, which kind of makes me yawn, but its intentions are incredibly honourable. And if we can land this policy, then I think there's all to play for. But it's going to mean, number one, the private sector stepping up and the government welcoming us with open arms. And number two, the place-based initiatives and the push has to come from places. And that means that places have to work as teams and not squabble like rats in a sack, as we know is the want of folk in localities if they don't start exhibiting some discipline and some hard work and coming together as a team. So on that ranty old note, I will hand back to you, Melanie.
Thank you, Jackie. Not ranty at all, but quite a neat segue, I think, to set Julie Kapsalis up, who is the chair of Catalyst South and Coast to Capital LEP, which is a good example, I think, of trying to bring a number of organisations together to create scale and collaboration. So, Julie, welcome to you, and over to you, really, to talk about the South, actually. How do we make sure this isn't asking the South to level down, and how do we make sure that, that the South isn't, because the South isn't uniformly, as Jackie described, the sort of the recipient of nothing but wealth and nothing but prosperity. The South itself, even London itself, masks a huge amount of deprivation too. So how do we make this a relevant agenda for the South of England too?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Melanie. And yeah, I'm here representing the 6 South East LEPs, which actually doesn't include London. So I'm not going to comment from a London perspective. I think one of the things that the LEPs certainly welcomed coming out of the white paper was some more certainty over the future of LEPs, because as many of you will know, a LEP review was announced about a year ago, and we have been trying to operate in a year with uncertainty, which is incredibly difficult for organisations and has had some real challenges. What the white paper has given us is certainty that in areas where there are not mayoral combined authorities or the first round of county deals, LEPs will continue. And I think, as others have said, from a sense of place and a sense of economic development, local authority boundaries are not always the best boundaries to look at. We need to be looking at functioning economic places, how businesses work, how transport and infrastructure comes together, and how those places work. And I think whilst LEP boundaries are not perfect, you can never draw a boundary and it works brilliantly. They do cross county boundaries. And I think what works very well about the Catalyst South grouping is that gives us an area sort of from Hertfordshire down to the Solent, across the coast and Kent and Essex, where we can work out where we're better working together and where we're not. And I think, Jackie, exactly as you said, this isn't about squabbling. This is about making difficult decisions about where funding is going to have transformational change, and recognising that not everyone will be a winner, but where funding does go, how we make sure it has the greatest effect. And I think, traditionally the South East, and if you do include London, has been the sort of engine room of the UK economy. But Melanie, as you said, the South East is a very mixed region. And in my own LEP area, we've got pockets of deprivation on the South Coast. I also, in my day job, am based in Crawley. And we know that the economy around Gatwick was one of the most disproportionately hit by COVID. I mean, the numbers of people on furlough were extraordinary. And key is going to be supporting economies like Crawley, like Slough, that were disproportionately hit through COVID to recover as well, because levelling up can only be paid for by economic recovery and economic growth. So my view is you cannot ignore the South East, whilst absolutely you need to be making sure that Bootle doesn't miss out and other places don't miss out. We do need to look across the whole country. And I think where I feel very strongly that LEPs have a role to play is not just cutting across the county boundaries or districts authorities boundaries, but bringing together the public, private and third sector for that transformational change, and making sure that when investment is made, there's a firm eye on things like skills. Skills is my day job, my focus. I'm managing director of a large college group. And what's going to be critical is making sure that we have not just young people with the right skills, but all the people who are going to have to retrain, upskill because their job roles have changed. And I'm really passionate about how we can do more to support social mobility through skills. And again, I think LEPs have a key role to play in that. I'm very proud that I've just led a consortium to secure an Institute of Technology for the Crawley and Gatwick Diamond area. And that's an area in Crawley that has some of the lowest levels of young people with a level 3 or above qualification. We have to address this, because if we are going to level up, we have to ensure that we are giving people those life chances and those skills that will enable them to progress into higher level jobs. So I guess I'd probably finish by reiterating what Charlie said, my plea that we be looking at this from a regional approach. And that we ensure that in levelling up, which I absolutely support, we don't inadvertently level down the southeast. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Julie, and to all of you. So thank you very much to people who are posting questions and comments. Please don't miss the opportunity over the next 15 or 20 minutes to ask questions to our panel. And I will come to the question on net zero in a little bit, because that's a whole topic in itself. But before I do that, just to pick up something that we've touched on a number of times through this idea of, getting away from beauty parades, this idea of targeting effectively, not everyone being a winner. So how's that going to work in practice? I mean, and do you think the government will actually be able to deliver on a vision for driving its money and its actions where it's most needed, as opposed to the places that either shout the loudest or have some other kind of, dare I say, sort of political attraction to them to invest in? How do we make sure the money gets to where it's most needed, is my question. Stephen, I'm not asking you to yet again speak for Bootle. I think Bootle's had we've made it clear, I think, our support for Bootle this afternoon. But how are we going to do that? And how does that work at local level, actually? How do you do that at local level? Because it must be tempting, mustn't it, to go where you think you can get the biggest bang for your buck quickly, which is not necessarily the place that needs it the most, because by definition, that's the hardest problem.
Yeah, and Bootle certainly had its moments in the sun today, hasn't it? Which is good. But yeah, I mean, I think that's where the certainly from a Liverpool City region context, the combined authority is so important that actually you can start. When you're looking at things at that level, local leaders know where the issues and the challenges are, and I think it's a healthy politics that exists, and also a healthy leadership that exists, certainly within a city region, and I know looking at other combined authorities as well. So that point about places not competing against each other is really, really important. And so I think if you get it right at a combined authority level and across the region, you know where the real challenges are. So instead of kind of being down in the weeds at a funding level, that actually by combined authorities having a much bigger pot to play with collectively, they know where the challenges are, can work with them. I think the other important point in that context, and I think everybody's alluded to it, is the role of the private sector. There's a wall of money out there, so it's about how you leverage the best private sector investment on top of any funding that does come through. So I think, again, at that local, broader regional level, that's where the understanding is. That's where the relationships exist as well with institutional funds, but also, overseas money. And there's no lack of it, coming in. So I think that's key for me, is how we look at the devolution model in total from a funding perspective.
Thank you, Charlie. I see you nodding there. Does it feel in the Highlands and Islands like there's a wall of money waiting to come your way?
We've seen lots of the ESG funds buying land holding for carbon offsets. So there's definitely money trying to get into carbon offsetting. We have a different issue. We don't have the wall of private sector money to come in the back of projects. Most of our projects are where there's market failure. So we're intervening to stimulate and address that. So I think levelling up for us, what's really important for us is alignment between UK government and Scottish government. This isn't a high view, a personal view. I think there's a danger where the approaches move out of alignment. That's when things don't work. Things work well when you have alignment and clarity and we work together. So that's very important over the next short period.
Thank you. Julie, you're nodding too. Do you want to come in and comment on that?
Yeah, I think that point about alignment and clarity, I think where there's a shared vision, that is when you get people that might have competed before to come together. And whilst it's from a slightly different area, it's for me a really good example. So within Sussex, there has been one of the pilots for the local skills improvement plan, which has been very much government's priority for how it gets employers to much more drive the skills coming out of colleges to meet their needs, because we know that's long been an issue where employers are saying they just can't get staff with the right skills. And actually what that has done is forced colleges to come together that normally would have been competing and demonstrate that the size of the market in terms of the size of the number of learners, the number of jobs is big enough and you know, to make putting some of that very small areas we compete over to one side and saying, let's come together, let's come up with an attractive proposition to the market, and then let's work together. And actually, it's been transformational in the world of skills through those local skills improvement plans. And I think it's a good example where there was a clear vision, a clear recognition of the lines of engagement where we competed, but actually the more important piece was where we collaborated. And I really hope that there'll be more of that going forwards.
Thank you, Jackie. You've seen over a number of years lots of projects come and go. Can you think of examples of that bring this to life, of where this has happened well already, despite there not being a levelling up white paper?
Well, I'm going to sound like the old woman of the sea again here, but and Lord Heseltine's avatar is already roaming around this seminar, so forgive me if I lean very hard on an example from his stable. I'm certainly old enough to remember the first ever kind of partnership. It wasn't quite the first ever, but it was the most successful really of the era, the City Challenge that Michael Heseltine invented, which rewarded people. It rewarded localities for getting their private sector into the room and working with them. And at the time, for every pound that was brought in from the private sector, you'd get a pound match from the public purse. So it was well worth everybody working together. It was the first time we'd seen it happen. And I would like to see far more of that sort of rewarding of the public sector for working with the private sector on the longer term. I think that is the way to go. And I think, Charlie's saying he hasn't got a wall of money, desperate to get into the Highlands and Islands. I bet he does. I bet he does. If DIT could welly in behind the localities to help us all secure inward investment, whether it's foreign direct investment or domestic, doesn't matter. I bet you there's a lot of money would like to come into Charlie's area. It's land of opportunity. Ditto Liverpool City region. I mean, ditto all the places. Julie's patch. Absolutely. So I think if there was a bit more of a kind of incentive for localities to work with their local real estate sector and their local investment people to try and bring in more investment, I think that would be the way to go.
Thank you. Charlie, I'm going to come back to you for a question posted by Daniel Vimpson. So great to see you with us, and Levelling Up's felt like quite an England-centric agenda to date because of the quite strong link to English devolution. Now, has there been a tangible change in noises coming from the Scottish Government in the last few years as a result of the UK Government's Levelling Up agenda, or is it really more of the same, is the question? Which you sort of hinted at this, but just unpack that a little bit more for us in terms of, where you think the Scottish Government is on this, and whether or not that's a sort of response to the UK Government's agenda.
Yeah, there's a big political angle to this, isn't there, in terms of devolution and Scottish Government's aims. I think broadly the Levelling Up agenda is welcomed, and the view is a pragmatic one. We have to make it work. So it's taking pre-existing approaches and trying to see where there is alignment. That's very important. Scottish Government have put a lot of effort into renewable energy and the drive towards that, and specifically net zero. And I think many of the things Jackie mentioned, that there is a wall of money behind some of the ScotWind things I mentioned. That there's some significant corporates with money to invest that could come into our region. So we need to use Levelling Up to have the infrastructure in place so that they can come in and maximise their investment. So that's an opportunity. But I think Levelling Up, we're very much in a position of we need detail and clarity as to how it's going to work. And from our perspective, we would hope a similar amount of funding is available.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's move to talk specifically a little bit more about net zero then. So the question that's been posted from the audience is, will levelling up help the UK achieve net zero faster? Now, I think on our league table of specific mentions, then I think actually carbon reduction comes some way below Liverpool, if possibly above the Highlands and Islands in terms of mentions in the white paper. It was quite noticeable, I think, the lack of reference specifically to carbon reduction in the white paper. So I think there are some genuine questions around how those two critically important political agendas, but also critically important agendas for our industry fit together, and making sure that they do align. So what do we think, panel? Do we think that levelling up is also an opportunity to drive towards net zero faster? And maybe what Charlie was talking about with the link to, that's where funding might be more attracted to than others. What do we think about all of that? Jackie, I'm going to come back to you.
I'm rather inspired by what Charlie's telling us, actually. I think it's great. Well, look, the short answer is I don't know. And I don't think the government knows either. We're not really, it's not really very fair of us as a panel to slag the government off for 322 pages of document and ask them to cover off on every single front, So, I mean, I do get that zero carbon has to be front and centre as one of our priorities. And I do get that we are facing an existential crisis, but this was kind of an economic paper, really, I suppose. But, having said that, instinctively, I feel that the best way of driving the zero carbon agenda has to be from the bottom up. So it has to be through localism and devolution. So instinctively, I feel it is there. But that also goes to something I was going to kind of rejoinder to Charlie's point a minute ago, which is, Charlie, trust me on this because I've been there and I know it. If you're waiting for central government to invent any detail or clarity, wait on, because it'll be hell or freeze over. What I think you have to do is to invent your own detail and clarity and hand it back to them and say, here it is, sunshine. And I think they'll bite your hands off if you do that. So I think if you in particular were to come at this pushing your zero carbon economy, I think you'd find they'd welcome you with open arms. Certainly when I was working in government, I'd have been putting out the red carpet for you. So, I think there's all to play for, but I'm afraid I think we're going to have to invent the methodology ourselves.
Thank you. Stephen, what's your take on this?
Well, I think unless we address the net zero agenda, then hell definitely won't freeze over, will it? So I think, but no, I think from again, I've referenced it from a city region perspective in terms of wind power and hydrogen and tidal, etc. There's a whole range of opportunities that exist there. But I absolutely take the point in terms of levelling up isn't explicit about this, but if you bring it down to the community level, to the local level, where the challenges are around levelling up in our towns predominantly, which have been so left behind, and communities, there's a real lack of pride as a consequence of that. It starts to impact upon people, doesn't it, when their towns are so failing? So the opportunity to transform town centres is absolutely essential part of the levelling up agenda. But transformation doesn't mean shining in new, and it absolutely shouldn't mean shining in new. So repurposing of our town centres, I think, is an important part of it, and that helps to play into the carbon agenda as well. So, certainly I'm going to, you'll kill me for doing it, but I'll reference Bootle. It's a 1960s brutalist concrete structure. A lot of people will probably say just knock it down and start again, but that's the last thing that we should be doing with it. So it has to be about greening. It has to be about sustainable transport, and that transport infrastructure as well. So I think, quite rightly, levelling up presents opportunities for us to address net zero.
Thank you. And Julie, I'm thinking Crawley and Gatwick here. This is a bit of a particular challenge, I assume, around net zero at the same time as bringing life back to a very deprived part of the south. But how do you approach this as a group of lets, apart from anything else? How do you kind of try and have these sort of, on the one hand, that imperative to tackle deprivation, improve people's lives, and on the other hand, some really big challenges around driving towards net zero?
Yeah, I think on the second point, the key thing is how we drive innovation, because actually we need to be driving innovation, whether it's coming out of our universities, direct from our businesses, knowledge transfer programs. And again, I think, sorry to keep harking back to skills, but I think it's critical. And I'm really proud that at my LEP, Coast Capital LEP, we funded a project with Ricardo, which is looking at hydrogen. We're working with Brighton and Hove and Metro buses on their hydrogen buses. And it's about the role that LEPs can play, forgive the use of the word, but as a catalyst to bring together higher education, cutting edge research, which we're really lucky across the country to have. We have got world leading universities doing some brilliant research, but we need to make sure it is being applied to our businesses, to looking at how we address problems in places. And for me, there's some really great work going on in Crawley in terms of looking at where, again, private sector providers looking at actually how housing stock can be partnership. It's bringing together the best of the private sector to address the challenge that the local authorities have. And for me, and clearly I am biased, but having the role of a LEP, a business-led organisation that can actually bring those partnerships together, broker those opportunities, I think is really key, because too often you've got several people and groups out there all striving for the same thing, but they've never spoken or they've never joined up. And as others have said in this course of this session, money is going to be short. Not everyone will win, but if we can bring organisations together, that money will have a greater impact across a greater number of places.
Thank you, Julie. Can I just stick with you for a second? Your sound's slightly wonky, so we'll hope that it lasts for the next 13 minutes at least, and then you'll be done. But there's another part of the question in the Q&A bar, and you're running out of time if you do want to ask a question. So please do get it into the chat or the Q&A function now, please. But is what should the role be of the next generation of both employees and residents in the levelling up debate? So, instead of just, people like us in mid-career or later stages of career, the people whose future we're talking about, how do we get them involved in this debate? And more importantly, actually, probably in terms of really shaping and delivering the future that they and their kids and their grandkids will be living through.
Yeah, and let me know if my sound gets wonkier. Sorry. I think it's critical, and I think it doesn't just start at colleges. It needs to start at schools. It needs to be a dialogue that young people are talking about the challenges, the opportunities, and thinking about their career pathways on the basis of the future challenges. I know it's said a lot, but that the jobs that the next generation will fill probably don't exist today. The reason my sound's wonky is I'm sat in a lay-by in my car, having just picked my son up from school, and I'm sat next to my school. There you go. He's on it now. The job that he will do in the future probably doesn't exist now. How do we think about what skills though might be needed? What transferable skills are key? And inspire young people to look at addressing those challenges. And an example of that is we've just secured some funding again across the Sussex colleges to teach modules in carbon literacy to every single student who is going through our college, because actually we think no matter what job you're in, that is going to be something that you need to think about. You don't just have to be thinking you're working in construction or green technologies. Every company has a responsibility, and every individual has a responsibility. So for me, that piece around carbon literacy is key, but also how we continue to strive to make links between employers, schools and colleges as close as possible, so that we are ensuring that young people know about the opportunities that are there now, and we can start to think about the opportunities of the future.
Thank you. Stephen, lots of nodding from you there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not important, Melanie, it's vital. And it's the reason why we, as the Liverpool Place Partnership, launched our Future Impact Board last year, where basically we've invited, younger generation of people within the construction sector to come together and let them come up with their own terms of reference in terms of that group. But it's refreshing to engage with them and hear them. And at the end of the day, it's our role to create places that are fit for the future that they are going to be occupying, their families are going to be occupying. So I think it's absolutely vital. And I think the piece about it's incumbent upon us as well to be trying to address that schools issue, to encourage people to get out to schools, to talk to the 10, 11, 12-year-olds, to let them know that there is a career out there in property and how they can influence things. And I think equally that comes down to how we engage with the communities where we're looking to affect change, that it's absolutely vital that we engage with the younger elements of those communities. And a lot of those are very difficult to access, but I think it's quite interesting when you start to use technology, digital ways of engaging with some of those younger generations, how they can have an active part in the conversation to create places that are fit for them.
Thank you, Charlie. I can see you nodding there. Is that something you've been thinking about in the Highlands and Islands?
Yeah. Every project we're involved in, we start with community engagement, and young people are crucial to that because you're trying to create a community for them for the future. So you need the community engagement and the partnership work, and you need to draw all the elements together. Now, we're in a fortunate position as the Economic Development Agency. We can do that. But I do worry some areas in the UK don't have necessarily that body in place that can pull all the elements together. So if I think of successful projects we've done, we've had the local university or college, the local authority, private sector, and the community together build the project up and then deliver it. To digress slightly, we also have a thing called the Scottish Land Fund. So Scottish Government will give money and encourage communities to buy, so there's community ownership. And one of the successful ones we recently were involved in is in Knoydart, which is one of the most remote places in the UK, no road access. The community used that to buy the pub because they needed the pub to create employment at the heart of the community. And it's a really good example of the community telling us what they want, them being given the funding to buy it, and then creating a sustainable community. So we just need that, but at each scale required, town, city, village, across the UK.
Great, thank you. That's just such a great example. I love that. We're coming to the end of the session, so I'm going to ask my last and closing question to each of the panel. So, Jackie, I'm going to come to you first. So, do feel free to make a comment on what we've been talking about in terms of getting the next generations involved. But then my last question, which is going to be the same to each of you, is what's the one thing you'd want the UK government to commit to support levelling up? Jackie?
Well, first I have to say I've been to Knoydart and it's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. And you did the right thing there, Charlie. You did the right thing there. And they're wonderful people. And that's a testament to you. And just to say also, Melanie, if I may comment on yesterday for Real Estate Live, I chaired a session on how to get young people into the real estate sector. And I have to say, your own Isabel Hees was on the panel from the BPF Futures Advisory Council, and the lovely Mark from Liverpool. So I kind of feel we're very joined up here. I have to tell you, it was one of the most luminous sessions I've ever been involved in. And as you know, I'm a very old woman. I had to keep apologising for being so old, actually, because it's all about getting young people into the industry. And it was really, really educational. I learned a huge amount. When that comes out on YouTube, I would commend it as a session. I think it'd be well worth revisiting. I'll certainly be looking at it again. And just to say also how very thrilled I am that Julie was on the panel with us today, because I think the skills piece is absolutely crucial to what we're talking about. We all come from the real estate sector, and we will bang on about real estate and yield and all that sort of nonsense, but actually it's the skills that we're going to need. And one of the great things that came through the Levelling Up white paper, we didn't touch on it today, is the 40% uplift in R&D budgets. And frankly, that's a godsend. And it's all about innovation, as Julie says. So I'm privileged to sit alongside her on this panel, really. I'll stop being so long-winded now, though, Melanie, because my answer to your question is pretty short. And I've already given you the answer, actually. I would like to see, when the funds start to get allocated, and there's going to be an awful lot of pain and devil in the detail, I would like to see explicit reward for private sector involvement and a denial of funds to those places that aren't engaging with their private sectors. I'm sorry if that's harsh. I think you lean on your LEPs hard. I think one of the great things, as Julie says, that came out of the white paper is that the LEPs have been reprieved. I'm a great fan. I'm a particular fan of her LEP, actually. I've done quite a lot of work with Coastal Capital. But I think you have to have your private sector in the room, standing shoulder to shoulder with your local government, your civic leaders. And if you haven't got your civic leaders and your business leaders standing together, then sorry, I don't think that that is going to be a recipe for success. So what's the point in government chucking more money at a situation? So I would be very keen indeed to see explicit reward for the private sector.
Great, thank you. Julie?
Short and sweet. Don't forget about the South East.
Thank you. That was very short and sweet. Stephen?
I'd echo what Jackie said around the importance of modern partnering between public and private sector. But so I think for me, going back to the theme of earlier on of let's move away from this beauty parade funding and also ensure that local authorities are properly resourced from both a capacity and capability perspective to make projects happen.
Thank you. And Charlie?
I would say more flexibility in terms of the body that could control the funding for Levelling Up. So rather than route it only through local authorities, there is some talk of regional bodies in the latest info. So from our perspective, purely selfish, we would rather we controlled it for the Highlands and Islands because we found that that's proven to be successful.
Great. Thank you all very much indeed. That's been a fantastic discussion, and we could have gone on for an awfully lot longer, but I think we would lose our audience to their suppers and their evenings. So, and I wouldn't get asked back, which I would regret because I love being part of Real Estate Live. So thank you to my fantastic panel. Thank you to everyone for listening and for getting involved. And back to you, Callum.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you as well to our panel for a great discussion this afternoon. That wraps up our final session of February 2022's Real Estate Live UK programme. It's been a fantastic 3 days of debate and discussion, and we'd like to thank all of our partners, sponsors, panellists, and audience members for playing their part in exploring some of the major topics related to property and sharing insight and inspiration along the way. All of our sessions have been recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel from next week. And to stay up to date with the latest from Real Estate Live UK, follow us on LinkedIn. Just search for Real Estate Live UK. Thank you all once again for joining us this afternoon and across the 3 days of events. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.